welcome. My name is Mike Pisauro. I'm the Policy Director for the Watershed Institute. Welcome to TMDL's Pollution Budgets. We are recording this webinar. We're going to be sending out a link to the recording as well as the presentation in a follow-up email, usually about 2 weeks or so after the presentation. If you do have a question, please use the question and answer function, which is usually at the bottom of Zoom. We will try to get to those questions towards the end. Again, if there was something that I felt we really should stop and address, I will do that. I appreciate everyone participating. As you may know, these Technical Fridays are the first Friday of each month, and we're here trying to provide detailed information to engineers, lawyers, municipal officials, and other environmental advocates. So again, thank you for participating. For land acknowledgement, we recognize that the land and water now under our care is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Lenape. We pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We respect their knowledge, culture, and tradition, which have contributed to the conservation of land and water. Just if you don't know, the Watershed Institute is located in central New Jersey. Our mission is keeping water clean, safe, and healthy. It's the heart of our mission. We work to protect and restore our water and natural environment in central New Jersey through conservation, advocacy, science, and education. We do a lot of statewide work. And we have a science department and advocacy department who is putting on the Technical Friday here, environmental education. And we have a lot of best practices, especially green infrastructure here at our Watershed Reserve in Hopewell Township. I have three great participants from the Department of Environmental Protection, and I greatly appreciate their participation. I have their bios up here. Helen Pang is a research scientist with the Division of Water Monitoring, Standards, and Pesticides Control at DEP. Debbie Kratzer is an environmental specialist at DEP in the Bureau of Environmental Analysis, Restoration, and Standards. Okay, we need to shorten these titles a little bit at DEP. And Crystal Carillo is an environmental service trainee at DEP. So they're here to provide their knowledge and expertise and explain everything TMDL. So again, I greatly appreciate them giving their time and expertise on this. All right, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Crystal to talk about TMDLs.
All right, thank you, Mike. As the lead of the TMDL unit, so I'm going to start this cover page and then the next slide, and then Crystal will continue for the first half of the presentation. So we're here to talk about TMDL and what we can do with TMDL to improve the water quality. So all three of us from the same unit of New Jersey DEP. We are from the TMDL unit, and there are 4 units under our bureau. The name of our bureau is Bureau Environmental Analysis and Standard. As you can see, our bureau is also responsible for the surface water, groundwater criteria, and then also we do the water assessment for the integrated report. We also oversee the operation of AmeriCorps. Our bureau is one of the 4 bureaus under the Division of Water Monitoring Standard and Pest Control. So we do have a bureau which is for the freshwater monitoring, and another bureau for the marine water monitoring. Pesticide control just joined our division recently. The director of our division report to the assistant commissioner, who is the assistant commissioner of water resource. She's also in charge of other 3 sort of division. So division water supply, division of water quality, and then New Jersey Geological Survey. So under division of water quality, we have 1 bureau who is in charge of the stormwater permitting, and then another bureau in charge of the surface water permitting. So during the TMDL development, we do receive support and input from people across the department, but primarily, we will receive from the people from monitoring and also work closely with the people from stormwater permitting and surface water permitting, especially during the implementation part. Okay, and we also like, depending on some grant which can support the post TMDL implementation, we also work together people from the watershed and the land management. They are under a different assistant commissioner. So by putting this up here, I just want to let you know, yes, we're from New Jersey DEP, but there may be some questions we are not the best person to provide the most accurate answer. So if that is the case, we will be happy to bring your question back to the department and then find the good answer for you and the follow-up. All right, thank you. And now, Crystal, please. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Hello, I'm Crystal, and in this presentation, we will cover when TMDLs are required, what a TMDL is, the development of TMDLs, including general procedures and case studies, and TMDL implementation. The Federal Clean Water Act mandates that states submit biennial reports to EPA describing the water quality in their state. For New Jersey, this report is called the Integrated Report. It used to be two separate items, the 305B Integrated List of Waters and the 303D Water Quality Limited Waters. But since 2002, we have combined the two reports into one integrated report. The integrated report is an effective tool to determine if a water body supports its designated uses. Some of the designated uses are aquatic life, recreation, water supply, fish consumption, and shellfish harvest. So the integrated report uses a rotating regional approach by giving a more detailed assessment on one of the 5 water regions, which you can see on the map there. The most recent integrated report was the 2018-2020 integrated report, which focused on the lower and upper Delaware. There are 958 assessment units. In New Jersey, our assessment units are Hub 14s. However, they used to be stream segments. In this integrated report, I'm so sorry. In this integrated report, we used data from more than 3 million data samples from more than 10,000 monitoring stations, addressing about 4,000 designated uses and over 90 parameters. The integrated report includes the 303D list, which is the list of impaired waters or waters that don't meet their criteria based on its designated use. If you look back on the map, it does show the water regions, but it also shows the New Jersey Pinelands boundary. The Pinelands are a little bit different, and they have some of their criteria is separate from the other designated uses. All right, next slide. Okay. With the integrated report, we are assessing the water quality data. So the types of data that are used are physical, chemical, biological, and sometimes visual data. The different networks are chemical, bacterial, microinvertebrates, fish communities, fish tissue, shellfish sanitation programs, beach closing, discrete and continuous, and sometimes special studies. This data is collected by different parts of our division, like the Bureau of Freshwater Monitoring and the Bureau of Marine Water Monitoring, like the fish communities and fish tissue and the shellfish sanitation program. Next slide. The data contributing to the integrated report comes from the water quality portal, which is a primary well, it comes from multiple places, But the water quality portal, which is the primary water quality portal, it contains data from DEP and other monitoring organizations and doesn't include continuous data. Comes from DEP continuous data, which has the continuous data from DEP, USGS continuous monitoring data with the USGS continuous data, recreational beach conditions where current beach status, water quality sample results, and other beach information can be found, and shellfish harvesting conditions where the current shellfish harvesting classification, including data from monitoring stations, can be found. If you look in the bottom corner, there's the pie chart. It shows the different sources of the data. So it's just to show that we get the data not just from the data we collected, but from a lot of different places. All the existing and readily available data is evaluated to ensure that it meets established data quality requirements. The data assessed in the integrated report is co-op data collected in the last 5 years, and there is a minimum requirement of the data needed to complete an assessment in an assessment unit. The assessment is based on multiple designated uses, stream classifications, and water quality standards for pollutants, many stations in each assessment unit. So the assessment is completed by assessment unit or HUC 14, but it includes the data from multiple stations within that area. From the assessment units are placed into one of the 5 sublist categories. Sublist 1 is attainment, sublist 2 is limited attainment, sublist 3 is insufficient data, sublist 4 is non-attainment, but there is some type of restoration plan in place already. And sublist 5 is non-attainment, but requires a TMDL or restoration plan. So these are the results from the most recent integrated report. You can see it has the number of assessment units for each of the different designated uses. There's 7 designated uses: aquatic life general, aquatic life trout, water supply, primary recreation, secondary recreation, fish consumption, and shellfish. The orange is non-attaining, the blue is insufficient data, and the green is attaining. Not all of the assessment units can serve all the designated uses. So things like aquatic life general and fish consumption are the 2 of the designated uses that can be covered by all 958 assessment units. Next slide. Okay, and then these are the top 10 listed pollutants from the 2018, 2020 report. It shows the number of assessment units that are impaired for each of these parameters, of the top 10 parameters. The different colors represent the different designated uses that each of those parameters serve. Associated with each of the designated uses, and the stripes show the number of impairments that are covered by a TMDL. So for example, total phosphorus, that stripe part at the top is how many are covered by TMDLs, 123, and then the bottom are impairments that aren't covered yet by a TMDL, and that goes for all of those different parameters. Right. So TMDLs are required under Section 303D of the Federal Clean Water Act to be developed for water bodies that cannot meet surface water quality standards after the implementation of technology-based effluent limits. So on the bottom, there's a chart that shows the development process of a TMDL. It starts by the assessment unit, or HUC 14, being placed on the water quality impairment list. Once it's there, we assess the sources that are causing the impairment. We try to construct a model that can calculate the sources. So we have an actual number on the loading. And then we try to determine an appropriate way to reduce that loading. We put it together in a report that we submit to EPA. And then once that gets approved by EPA, we can start to implement the TMDL. So what are TMDLs? The TMDL is the maximum amount of a pollutant that can enter a water body without exceeding the standard. The TMDL is one loading value that consists of a waste load allocation, load allocation, margin of safety, and reserve capacity. The waste load allocation is, for example, like a point source, such as a municipal treatment plant. The load allocation is a non-point source, like animal waste or agriculture cropland. And then the margin of safety considers any uncertainty and can be implicit or explicit depending on the technical approach. And the reserve capacity is optional and it accounts for future growth. Targets of the TMDL. The target is the water quality target set for the TMDL. Ideally, we want the water body to be within the numeric criteria in the standard. On special occasions, this is not possible, so the target can be set to the narrative criteria or the non-numeric criteria. Then there are times when the water body cannot meet the standard because of the natural condition is not meeting the standard. So even if there is no development, the water body would not be within the standard. So the natural condition would be the target. Sometimes there could also be an alternative endpoint, such as a site-specific criterion, which we've done in the past. So linking source loads with observed water quality. For the TMDL, we need to quantify the loading to determine how we can reach the target concentration. To do that, the models that we use to quantify the loading vary from a simple mass balance model or a spreadsheet calculation to a more complex dynamic water quality model, depending on the system. There's a lot of different factors that go into that, so it really depends on how simple or complex the model should be. So when we're developing a technical approach, the model selection is based in part on the nature of the source, whether it's a point source, non-point source, or both. It's a point source. We might want to go more in depth with the model, or if it's a non-point source, we might be able to do a more simple model. The geographic extent of the impairments, are we addressing one water body or multiple water bodies? Is it a small area? Is it a very large area? Are we trying to address one or more impaired parameters? The data availability or data needs, if there's not enough data available in that area, and the time and resource considerations. Do we have the time? Is it time sensitive? Do we have the resources to complete or to address the impairment the way we want? Sometimes we could address it through a restoration plan or another way that might address it quicker. So we have to take all of that information into consideration. So the report has 6 required components. Depending on the technical approach, we receive a technical report. However, we do create the report that gets submitted to EPA. It has to include these 6 items. So the first is the source assessment, which includes the source assessment, which characterizes and quantifies the sources, the point sources, non-point sources, and the background. The second part is the water quality analysis. What did we pick for the endpoint or the target for the TMDL? How we link the pollutant sources with the water quality, and the consideration of seasonal variation or critical conditions such as high flow or low flow in that area. The third is TMDL calculations. So the technical approach we used, including the loading capacity, margin of safety, load and waste load allocations. We also have to include follow-up monitoring to track the improvement in water quality once this is implemented. And then going into the implementation plan. The implementation plan is a plan we create to help improve water quality through sometimes through an NJDEP's permit revisions or grant restoration projects or BMPs. It all depends on the parameter and the area. We're currently working with DWQ to improve some of the old implementation plans and create more updated ones that have better implementation. And then the 6th part is public participation. Public participation opens the draft report to the public, where we can take public comment and input before finalizing the report. That way we can get input on the best way to implement the changes we need to improve the water quality. And then once this is all together and we get the public comment, we can finalize the report and submit it to EPA. And that's where we get into this. So after the TMDL report is created, we propose the TMDL as an amendment to the Water Quality Management Plan in accordance with the NJAC 7:15. Once it's submitted, by submitting it to EPA. So once it's submitted to EPA and approved, it's considered established. And then DEP can approve it as an official amendment to the Water Quality Management Plan. And in that case, it would be considered adopted. But once the TMDL is established, DEP can implement the TMDL. And then implementation, all the projects and activities affecting water quality in any planning area shall be developed and conducted in a manner consistent with the adopted area-wide plan. The commissioner shall not grant any permit which conflicts with an adopted area-wide water quality management plan. So once it's adopted, it has to, anything in that area has to follow what's in the TMDL report.
Thank you, Crystal. That's a part Crystal covers. So I'm going to continue, but I'm not sure if we want to pause a little bit and then answer any questions, or should I just continue?
Why don't you continue? And just a reminder for people to put their questions in the Q&A. We've had 2 which are being dealt with. So yeah, keep putting your questions in the Q&A section. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to give you some TMDL examples. As you learn from Crystal, we do follow a general procedure, and then we have to include certain component in our TMDL development. But for each individual TMDL, we have to give specific attention, come up with a customized solution in order to address the water quality issues for a certain water body. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first one is the non-tidal Passaic TMDL, which was adopted in 2008. The second one is a non-tidal Raritan TMDL, which was adopted in 2016. And then the last one will be the Diurnal Lake TMDL, which is ongoing. Okay, the first one is non-tidal Passaic River TMDL. This is the first one we use dynamic model to come up the technical solution for the TMDL. As you can see from this map, it covered a huge area in the northern part of New Jersey, right? And then given the age of this TMDL, back then, the assessment unit was still based on the stream segment instead of the HUC 14. So as highlighted in red color, that indicate all the streams which violating the total phosphorus criteria within the stream, which is 0.1 milligram per liter. So if, just walk you through, this is the upper middle Passaic, and then this is the lower Passaic, and this is the Pumpkin, and part of the Whippany is also TP impaired, and then part of the Rockway is also TP impaired. Instead of not only Passaic, we do see the impairment in the Ramapo River. And to make this system more complicated, we have Wanakil Reservoir. And then we do have not only the 53 wastewater treatment plant discharge into the system, we also have water supply intake within the stream. So given the size of this watershed and then complexity of the system, we think the dynamic model is the best way to provide a robotic solution. So when we evaluate, and then we have to consider the features of different part of the drainage shed. It's a big drainage shed, right? So we have a good combination. So depending on the portion of the drainage shed, like for the Passaic part, for the Passaic, from upper middle and then to the lower, for the Passaic part, we do have a coupled flow model with a water quality model. So the flow model is the model developed by USGS called DA flow. And then the water quality model is the version back then, that's the WASP model. And we also include a watershed model integration too, which is GIS-based WAMIT. Okay, so that's mainly for this Passaic River part. And then because we have the Pumpkin Lake is up here. We have the Pumpkin Lake, and we have to using a different approach, which is a mass balance model to provide boundary condition to the watershed model at Pumpkin Lake. With regarding the reservoir itself, there is an existing model which specifically developed just for the Wanakil Reservoir, which is the LA water. So we use that model to simulate the water quality in the Wanakil Reservoir. And then for other part of the drainage shed, we do have different boundaries. So we're using existing TMDL work, our existing study to set up the boundary for the entire drainage shed. So the boundary will be added into the WASP model, which is taking care of the Passaic and the Pumpkin part. So that's, overall layout of the technical approach we use for the Passaic model. It's a good combination. And
that, as I interrupt you for 1 second. Could you just sort of explain what a flow model and a water quality model are the
Okay.
WASP and the DA flow?
Yes. So the flow model is considering is to simulate the volume of water which generate from the drainage shed, and then how those water flow, like the velocity, how fast, how slow. That's the flow model tell us. And then the WASP model is to simulate the water quality part. Like, okay, for the TP concentration with this much loading coming into the system with the by carrying by the water at certain point or at certain time, what will the concentration would be? And then the water quality model also simulated different water quality parameters, not just total phosphorus, also including chlorophyll A, and then different species of the nutrient. So that gave you an idea on the distribution of the concentration within the water body simulated by the model. So that's the difference. So normally when we have a model, we say it's the hydro model or water quality model.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay. As I mentioned from the beginning slide, the reason why we were focusing on Passaic because we see the TP impairment. But when we simulate the water body, we realize that even though the TP concentration in the upper and the middle part of the Passaic is high, but the primary productivity is not that high. So, normally we're using the diurnal DO swing to indicate the productivity. The data we collect there, the model simulation show that the DO swing is not that huge. And then the low DO is not because of the nutrient. So that tells us we may have to modify our target. And then by simulating the water body and then do the simulation also for the Wanacue reservoir, we actually end up to pick up 3 critical water quality targets to develop the Passaic TMDL. Those 3 are, the first one is we want the seasonal average chlorophyll concentration within the Wanacue reservoir to be less than 10 microgram per liter. So that's the first target. The second target is we shoot for the lowest location within the Passaic River at Dundee. We want the chlorophyll A concentration with the seasonal average to be less than 20 microgram per liter. And then the third critical location for this TMDL is to get the 0.05 milligram per liter of total phosphorus within the Pumpton Lake, which is the surface water criteria for TP in a lake. So that's 3 critical location, critical water quality endpoint used in the Passaic TMDL to derive the reduction we need from point source and non-point source. So running the model, after model being calibrated, so the calibration of the model means you plug in, you twist all the settings in the model. You want model to show the similar result as the data you collect. So that's the calibration part. After the model is calibrated, we are able to, okay, I'm going to reduce the loading from this discharger. I'm going to reduce the loading from those runoff. How the system will respond to that. That is what the model help us to figure out. So with those 3 targets in mind, we try different reduction scenarios, and then we end up to be, we're requiring 0.4 milligram per liter TP as a long-term average for all the wastewater treatment plant effluent limit. And then at the same time, we require 60% runoff reduction from stormwater loading. So that's both point source reduction and non-point source reduction. With that kind of reduction, we are able to achieve the target we set for this TMDL. So this plot shows you under the reduction scenario specified by the TMDL what the chlorophyll concentration is in the Wanacue Reservoir. It's 3 different locations. It's like a 3 years simulation. As you can see, the concentration of chlorophyll A most of the time is below, instantaneous chlorophyll A concentration is below 10 microgram per liter. So we're very sure that with this kind of scenario, with this level of reduction, the chlorophyll A of 10 microgram per liter as a seasonal average is well met at the Wanacue Reservoir. And then this is what we put in our TMDL condition. So this is the Passaic River. The next one I want to talk about the non-tidal Raritan River. Remember, Passaic is the first one, and then Raritan is another one. So we do learn from what the lessons of experience we obtained from the Passaic. So again, the Raritan is another bigger watershed, and it includes 7 counties and 80 municipalities. And then impairment-wise, there are TP impairment, TSS impairment, pH impairment, and the DO impairment. So for 39 HUC 14s, so for the Raritan, we start using HUC 14 as the assessment unit. So that's 34 impaired HUC 14s, but considering the combination of the parameter and the assessment unit, that's a total 52 water quality impairment combination. And then again, there are a lot of wastewater treatment plants in this watershed, and then 33 or 40 of them covered by this. They are waiting for the TMDL so they can have their TP limit. So that's the general scope of the Raritan work. This one, we continue for the water quality part, we continue to use WASP model. And then for the hydro part, you switch to a different model. This is called the Hydrovomet. The Hydrovomet not only simulate the hydrologic features, but also do the non-point source loading simulation. So you see the input value for the Hydrovomet, including the discharger flow, the hydraulic parameter, sub-watershed parameters, and also EMC, that's event mean concentration. So that's like for the certain land use, what's the concentration we would expect for certain parameter in the runoff. So that's called the event mean concentration. And then EFS is the base flow concentration. It's not the runoff concentration, it's just the concentration under the base flow. So we provide those together with the hydraulic parameter weather data into the Hydrovomet. And then the Hydrovomet output there consists 2 parts. One part is the non-point source loading file. Another part is the hydrodynamic file. Both of them will be introduced into the WASP. Okay, so WASP also take the discharger boundary condition of the input time series and the suite of kinetic parameters, and then simulate the water quality within the stream. So the coupled Hydrovomet and the WASP gave us the technical foundation to develop the TMDL. For the critical endpoint for the Raritan, that's another customization for the based on what we observed and what we encountered during the development. Okay, first I want to start from the 3rd bullet here, which is at the outlet HUC 14, we want them to meet 0.1 milligram per liter of total phosphorus as specified by the surface water criteria. Okay, so as you see from the map, for the green area, that's the north-south branch of Raritan. for every single HUC 14 within that boundary, we check the PP concentration at the outlet. And we want, when we reduce the loading, we want the concentration at the outlet to be less than 0.1. So that means meeting the surface water criteria. And there is another portion within the watershed. We also want them to meet the TP criteria, which is the Bidenbrook, the TP endpoint. That's the yellow one. In addition to meeting TP, we also have several lakes added to be the control point. So the critical endpoint. So for those lakes, we want them to be in compliance with the 0.05 milligram per liter of the TP criteria for the lake. So the lakes include Raven Lake here and Solitude Lake here, and then the Kutztown Lake here, and then the bigger one, this light blue, that's the Carnegie Lake. Okay, and then the model, remember we do have the pH impairment, but unfortunately WASP does not simulate pH. I would say the version then, the WASP version at that time does not simulate pH. So, but we were lucky based on the diurnal data, we are able to find the correlation between the pH and the dissolved oxygen. And then since the model simulated dissolved oxygen, so we were able to say, hey, the criteria want the pH to be less than 8.5, right? So at specific location, what's the corresponding DO with that when the pH is 8.5? So at 3 locations, we are able to set up that conversion. Say SBR4, if my target pH is less than 8.5, that means my DO need to be less than 13.8. Well, for LR5, if my target for pH is 8.5, and while my DO has to be 11.3, based on the correlation shown from the data we collect. And then another one is SBR10. So from those 3 locations, we were able to set up the correlation between DO and the pH, and then we were able to come up a surrogate DO target to represent the pH. And then there is for the DO impairment, it was addressed not by this TMDL effort, is resolved by the pending wastewater treatment plant ammonia limitation, because ammonia can cause the low DO. So by putting a limit of ammonia in their effluent limit, the DO issue was improved. So this is the combination of the water quality critical endpoint used in the Raritan. So you see the difference, like for the Passaic, we actually come up with set specific criteria chlorophyll A for 2 locations, which determine the reduction for the TMDL. Well, here everything's still based on the level required by the surface water criteria, but really depending on the situation, we have to make some adjustment. One thing is, as Crystal pointed out, under that one slide for the water quality target, we have the natural condition. It actually happened here because for one of the lake, we run the model simulation. We assume everything within the watershed to turn into a forest. But because the size of the drainage shed is huge, so it actually, even under the natural condition, we will not be able to meet 0.05, that target TP concentration. So we had to adjust that. For that one, for that lake, we only using the concentration under the natural condition as the target. Okay. And then with all those, for the Raritan TMDL, we were able to come up the TMDL loading capacity to address DO, pH, TP, and the TSS impairment. So here is just one example to show you. This is for the station on the South Branch Raritan River, we call SBRR10. The dash blue, that show is the simulate existing condition. So as you can see, it's a big swing because this is the DO concentration. So we do see a big DO swing at that location as the current condition tell us. And then this is for this right solid line, that's the minimum DO criteria. So per the criteria, the DO should not be below 4 milligram per liter. And what is this dash line on the top? That dash line, remember, we have that 8.5 as the pH criteria, but we were able to build up the correlation between DO and the pH. So this reflects when I want the pH to be less than 8.5, my DO should be controlled less than this line. So now, what's the situation under the TMDL? This green line show you, and with the reduction required under the TMDL, we see the DO at this station, they are higher than the 4 milligram per liter, at the same time, less than the 12. So that's tell me this is this reduction satisfy the need and address the water quality target. Okay, so for the Raritan, we actually end up to give also the waste load allocation to the discharger, same as the Passaic is expressed as a long-term average. And also we add also phosphorus as part of in their limit, in their permit, so they need to monitor the orthophosphorus, since orthophosphorus is a critical thing for the productivity. And then for the non-point source, really depending on the location, it's range from 60% reduction to 80% reduction. And regarding the margin of safety, we assign 10% to the point source and 20% to the non-point source. And the reserve capacity, we did include some reserve capacity just for the future growth. So this is just like an overview of the Raritan TMDL. The last one is the Duherno Lake. The Duherno Lake, the reason we were looking Duherno Lake is because per the integrated report, we have 3 stream Hawk14s. So those 3, this one, this one, this one. 3 stream Hawk14s, they are violating the 0.1 milligram per liter criteria. So they were put on sublist 5. So, and then we want to address that impairment, right? But when we look at the data closely, we saw that even though the TP concentration is above 0.1, but based on the diurnal DO data we collect, from different stations from those 3 assessment units, none of them show a big diurnal swing. That means there's no productivity there. So TP is high, but no productivity. So our conclusion for those 3 assessment units is actually delisting. So because the elevated TP is not causing the designated use unsuitable, therefore we are going to do delist. So that's like, that's another outcome when we do a TMDL study. It's not just like every single time we will have a TMDL developed. No, sometimes maybe just a delisting. So that's exactly what will happen in the Duherno Lake. But at the same time, we look at the data collected from the lake itself, and then we did a visual assessment. We had a site visit. We noticed that the lake itself is eutrophic. But the data show that eutrophic was not put into the database, the WQX. Remember, Crystal point out where we pull out the data to serve the for each cycle of the integrated report, we pull out data from those database for certain period of time. But unfortunately, those data were too old, so they were not included in the latest integrated report. But therefore, right now, we are doing the additional sampling from the Duherno Lake. So this summer and also next year, we want to collect additional data to verify the situation in the Duherno Lake. If it is indeed eutrophic, we will move forward with our TMDL, our other restoration measures. Okay, so with those three examples, I just want you to get a feeling. It's like when people say a TMDL, right? It's not just like a cookie cut procedure. It has to be, you know, you need to have a special analysis about the water body, about the impairment, and then also the resource you can use. So it is a significant effort for everyone. And then for the TMDL outcome and the implementation plan, as Crystal pointed out, implementation plan is an important session in our TMDL report. So we are supposed to, you know, lay out that for the wastewater treatment plant, when they under their renewal of their permit, they need to receive an effluent limit, which is consistent with their WLA, the waste load allocation specified by the TMDL. And then for the runoff loading, which can be achieved through MS4 permit improvement, our fertilizer law, and also, you know, we want to see some like obtain more like future funding to support those nutrient reduction BMP. So that including like 319 grant, our, you know, different loans, our different fundings. But very important, you know, we realize that when we look at the watershed, we look from using the data, using the map, right? But we know the stakeholder, they know the area better than anybody else. So that's why when we develop the implementation plan, we really welcome any input from the stakeholder. That will be the best way for us to come up with implementation plan, which is very useful and then helpful for the overall outcome of the TMDL effort. Okay, so right now in the TMDL implementation plan, we have some like, you know, like a standard language. We are planning to enhance the implementation plan based on what we had before. So we are considering like additional measures or potential measures. So we may revise the stormwater control audits for new development and redevelopment. We may expand the stormwater facility mapping and then make sure the implementation and maintenance program is in place. And we also want to do a schedule to retrofit the basin to address any water quality concern. And then we want to identify and eliminate illicit connection, and also like a scoring, that's also another issue we need to address. Also, we feel like, you know, proper training to the proper team, our members, it's very, very helpful. You know, you want to let people know why we're doing this, why it's important to do it in the right way. Other potential measures really depending on the system. For example, if the septic system is like one of the loading source for a certain water body, we want to do like, you know, septic system lessening program that will track the plump out of system tank every 3 years and do the good inspection. If there is some like on-site wastewater treatment system, we want to explore any like emerging technology to treat the phosphorus. And also, is there any possibility to connect the existing, connect the on-site wastewater treatment to a available wastewater treatment plant? Okay, And a good restoration plan is always helpful to identify the hotspot within the watershed for the nutrient source control. We have the statewide fertilizer audience, but we feel like we need to enhance the implementation of that audience. And the impervious cover definitely will cause more runoff. So we want to develop an impervious cover reduction plan to minimize the volume of the runoff. So this is the ideas we have. And we are working together with the stormwater people to make sure we have clear description in our ongoing TMDL implementation plan. So that will be easier for people to use and then to have their work. Okay, so for us, TMDL is our daily work, but sometimes people ask like where we can find TMDL and how can I know there is a TMDL in the lake near where I live, right? So there are ways you can find the TMDL. So if you just Google, you put NJDEP TMDL, and then you will see the second search. I think it's the second one. Now the first one is you can see we do have that TMDL webpage, and then you will be able to find a table of TMDL that contains all the TMDLs we have been developing so far. Okay, and then we also have a TMDL lookup tool, which is under the webpage of the Bureau of Stormwater Permit. And so by input the county and the municipality, you will be able to find what the TMDL you have in that municipality. So that's another tool you can use. There's another one is like if you like the visually to check, right? This is the Utility Geo Web. So there is a layer for the TMDL. So I think, that's if you want to figure out more information, which TMDL is in your area. And then if you want to read that TMDL table have all the link to the specific TMDL report. Okay, all right. So that's all I'm going, we are talking, and I have all the contact information here. And then the phone number is the general number of our bureau. So if you want to call, and they will find us. If you want to send an email, you're welcome to send us the email. And
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I love these. I get to learn so much more than I ever knew beforehand. It's really why I do these for me. So there's a lot of great questions. So I guess, one of the things I'm going to start off, I'm going to take moderator privilege and ask my own question. Helen, when you were talking about the TMDLs, you talked about reserve capacity. So that's sort of like not a safety of margin, but is that assuming from a municipality or a development perspective, additional development is going to occur and you've already accounted for those discharges, or additional wastewater treatment discharges? Can you sort of explain what the reserve capacity and how you come up with that?
The reserve capacity is more for the future growth, right? Saying, okay, we know there is another wastewater treatment plant will be constructed in the near future. So, and that they're not in the current system yet. So we want to put some room there. So for that kind of growth.
Do you look at the towns within that watershed, their zoning, what they would allow? So as additional development occurs, additional stormwater management would happen, but there would be additional total suspended solids or phosphorus or nitrogen discharges. Is that part of the reserve capacity, or is that not included?
I think, with regard to reserve capacity, we did not specifically say it's only for the point source or cannot be used for the non-point source. So yeah, it's open for both. And we just need, whenever it's this case, we need to take a closer look.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Keep putting your questions in the question answer. Deborah has been putting in a bunch of links, the TMDL lookup tool, the TMDL list, and a link to the ArcGIS in the chat. So if you are interested in those, please look at that. All right, so there are some questions. So how do New Jersey's combined sewer overflows or the combined sewer systems impact the budget for these water bodies?
It's really depending on the water body. If there is a CSO, it will be, if there is a CSO, we need to consider those.
So
As long as,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's just like, you know, remember when we have the source assessment, we need to consider all the source contributing that loading into the system.
So that's the wastewater treatment plants, that would be combined sewer systems, that would be the MS4 system, all those point sources would go into a waste load allocation.
Yes.
Great. All right. How do you get reductions of nutrients from non-point source pollutants in stormwater discharges? Do you impose limits on an MS4 permit holder? So I'm going to start with one. This is one of those things that it's one of my little bugaboos, I guess. Stormwater discharges from an MS4 system is a point source. It has historically been thought of as a non-point source pollution, but once you collect it and treat it and discharge it from a pipe or a canal or channel, it is a point source. So technically the MS4 permit is a discharge permit. With that being said, I'll turn over the rest and reread the question. How do you get reductions of nutrients from non-point source pollutants in stormwater discharge? Do you impose limits on MS4 holders?
It will not be the same as a wastewater treatment plant. You know, for the wastewater treatment plant, we do give a specific number for their effluent limit, like the 0.4, the long-term average, we convert based on the sampling frequency, and then the uncertainty, we convert that as the 0.76 as the average monthly limit. But for this MS4, we don't have that kind of number there. We may have some requirements saying you need to, you know, if you're doing the street sweeping, you need to do the increase the frequency, and then, you know, so it's more like the measures you can consider to reduce the nutrient loading.
And you know, when we started off in the beginning, DEP is coming out with a new MS4 permit, which will require municipalities to address those waste load allocations for urban stormwater. We did an entire webinar on that last month. We can put that if you could put that link to that webinar in the chat, that would be great. All right. Is 60 to 80% reduction of nutrients from non-point sources realistic?
I know, it's a good question. I would say it's hard, right? But at least, you know, we should work on it. That's another thing, like, you know, remember in the TMDL report, we always have a follow-up monitoring component there. We definitely, you know, want to do the follow-up monitoring, like based on what are being done within the watershed to see how the water body responds to those measures. We cannot guarantee we will be able to achieve, but we are 100% sure the water quality will be improved with the actions being taken.
So this is almost an iterative process. You develop the TMDL, you come up with the implementation plan as projects are implemented, as treatment plants are permits up for renewal or ratcheted down, you continue to monitor, and then you may go back in and readjust the implementation plan. So to see what things are working and what things aren't, so that overall the goal is to improve water quality. I'll take moderator's privilege again, ask another question. Does the TMDL set out a schedule to actually achieve all of the waste load allocations and load allocations and to actually achieve water quality? Is that time schedule built into the TMDL or somewhere else?
Very good point. For the waste load allocation, which we assign to the wastewater treatment plant, it's, they have their own schedule when it's the permit renew time. So they have some when it will be the permit renewal, and then at the time of renewal, how long they have to improve their effluent limit. They do have some requirement from the NJDEP program. Okay, but regarding the MS4, there's no specific schedule, but we hope that it's ongoing. It's under the discussion. Maybe as part of the watershed improvement plan, there's some schedule requirement, but the department hasn't issued anything in a formal way yet.
All right. Here's another question. What is the status of computer modeling of Barnegat Bay to help establish a TMDL for nutrients in the bay? What is the status of the TMDL report for nutrients in the Barnegat Bay?
That's a good question. I'm the right person to answer that question. So as you know, USGS is working on the modeling for the Barnegat Bay. So that contains 3 pieces. So one is the hydrodynamic model, one is the water quality model, and then the third part to build that linkage to make sure the hydrodynamic model talk with the water quality model. Regarding the status of the model, we finished the calibration. We received the comments from model evaluation group, which is a peer review procedure. They gave us some very good comments, and then based on their comments, we are entering the phase 1 TMDL work. So this phase 1 TMDL, we are going to upgrade the model because the WASP model was built on 7.52. So now the latest version is WASP 8. So USGS just finished upgrading the model to WASP 8, and they are doing some checking to see the calibration is still good or not. And then we are going to run a closed natural condition simulation that gave us what's the level of total nitrogen concentration. So Barnegat Bay is because it's the SURI program, so the total nitrogen instead of total phosphorus is the nutrient of concern. So we are going to run a near natural condition, which gave us what's the lowest total nitrogen concentration the system can obtain that will be used as the water quality target in combined with the finding from another biological study. That biological study is the macroinvertebrate study. That one gave us a correlation between the total nitrogen concentration and then the percentage of the sensitive species, saying that if I want the sensitive species to be no less than 20% for the overall matrix, what the total nitrogen concentration should be. It's about 5 microgram per liter. So that will be part of the target, but we have to consider a certain part of the bay, we cannot achieve that low level at all. So we have to using the concentration under the natural condition as the target. So with that combination, we are going to develop the phase 1 TMDL. So that's where we are for the Barnegat Bay.
Okay, great. Another question. What are some steps that individuals, communities, and watershed management groups can do to help reduce TMDL pollutants from reaching the waterways? So, I mean, part of that is obviously what is in the implementation plan. Part of it, I think, is 319H grant projects to help address the either point source or non-point source pollution. I don't know if there's other things, Helen or Crystal, or Deborah, that you have it, you can think of. And yeah, you also mentioned, I think, retrofitting stormwater basins. That might be another area where we can get a lot of good reductions. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. All right. Yeah, that's always a tricky one. If it was easy to figure out how to do the reductions, we would be implementing TMDLs and seeing water quality improvements left and right. But that is kind of somewhat of a tricky one.
Yeah.
All right, leave it for another second for questions. All right, we're just about time. So, Helen, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
Awesome, thank you. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and oops. DEP, thank you very much, Helen, Crystal, and Deborah, for providing your experience and knowledge on this very important topic. I think we're going to see a lot more importance of TMDLs in the next coming years as the MS4 permit comes out. So I think this was very timely. As I mentioned, this is a monthly series. So we are having another Technical Friday, which is on June 3rd from 12 to 1:15. We're going to be talking about resilient New Jersey local. We're going to be talking about climate change and adaptation as a part of the component of the land use master plan. Last year, New Jersey enacted laws that required municipalities to take a look at climate change, take a look at climate hazards, and come up with plans to implement and address those and to reduce it. So that is coming up on June 3rd. We again have a speaker from DEP and one from FEMA talking about the tools and things that are available. Again, we will be sending probably about 2 weeks or so. We will be sending out the link to the recording as well as the presentations so that everyone can see them. We do have a YouTube channel, so you can go to YouTube, the Watershed Institute, and find all of our past webinars. So it is now 1:16. Again, DEP, thank you so much for providing your technical knowledge and time today. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. And I hope to see everyone next month in June 6th. We'll also put a link to that webinar and the outreach that coming out in about a week or two, and that should be live to register today as well. So again, I appreciate everyone, and everyone have a good day and good weekend, and happy Mother's Day to all those mothers out there. Thank you.